At my son's wedding dinner, I noticed my husband tapping his champagne glass with a spoon. I thought he was about to make the kind of loving toast we'd shared at family milestones for 38 years. Instead, with crystal chandeliers glowing above us and 200 guests smiling in anticipation, he cleared his throat and said, "Before this beautiful night goes any further, I need to be honest. This is the end for us. I've found someone new." I just smiled and stayed in my seat. "I'm glad you're here. Follow my story until the end, and tell me where you're watching from." Because what happened next reached far beyond that ballroom. My son's wedding at the Grand Willows estate was supposed to be one of the happiest days of my life. At 67, I had spent a year helping plan every detail, from the ivory roses on the reception tables to the 5-tier cake standing beneath golden lights. I wore a sapphire blue gown my late mother would have adored, and for one shining afternoon, I believed all my sacrifices had led to this moment. The ballroom sparkled. Silverware gleamed. My new daughter-in-law looked radiant. My son beamed with pride. And then my husband destroyed it all with one sentence. A young blonde woman stood near the back of the room, her hand resting lightly on the empty chair beside him. She couldn't have been older than 32. The silence that followed felt louder than the string quartet. I heard someone gasp. A fork hit the floor. My son's face went ghostly pale. But I did not cry, because in that single moment, as humiliation burned through me like ice, I realized something far more important than my husband's betrayal. He thought I was the woman he could leave behind quietly. He was wrong. For a moment, no one moved. The wedding band stopped playing so abruptly that the final piano note seemed to shatter in midair. 200 guests sat frozen beneath crystal chandeliers, their champagne glasses suspended halfway to their lips. My husband, Thomas, the man I had stood beside for nearly 4 decades, set down his spoon as calmly as if he'd just announced the dessert course. Then he smiled. Not at me. At her. The young woman stepped forward in silver satin heels, one manicured, hand sliding onto his arm like she belonged there. She wore a pale gold dress I suddenly recognized. I had helped pay for it 3 weeks ago when my future daughter-in-law said her friend from work couldn't afford proper wedding attire. My knees should have buckled. They didn't. Instead, I sat straighter in my sapphire gown and folded my linen napkin carefully beside my plate. Across the room, my son Daniel looked like someone had knocked the breath out of him. "Dad," he whispered, his voice cracking under the weight of public shame. My new daughter-in-law, Vanessa, stood speechless beside him, one hand still clutching her bouquet, as though she'd forgotten the ceremony was already over. Thomas adjusted his cufflinks, the diamond ones I bought him for our 30th anniversary. "Evelyn," he said, finally looking at me, his tone almost bored. I didn't want to keep living a lie. A lie. I thought about the years I spent stretching grocery budgets while he built his business, the nights I stayed awake with sick children, the holidays I hosted, the mortgage I helped pay, the life I believed we built together. Around me, whispers spread faster than wildfire. How awful. Who is she? Did Daniel know? But humiliation does something strange when it cuts too deeply. It can either break a woman or sharpen her. So I rose slowly, smoothed my dress, lifted my champagne glass, and with every eye in that grand ballroom locked on me, I gave my husband the kind of smile that made his new woman shift nervously. Because Thomas thought this was the night he would humiliate me, he still didn't understand. This was only the night he introduced me to who he really was. I raised my glass high enough for the chandelier light to catch the crystal. "Well," I said, my voice calm and clear, "after 38 years of marriage, I suppose honesty, however delayed, deserves a toast." A nervous ripple moved through the ballroom. Some guests looked down at their plates. Others leaned in, hungry for disaster. Thomas had expected tears, maybe pleading, maybe the kind of public collapse that would make him look justified. He didn't get that. To my son and his beautiful bride, I continued, turning toward Daniel and Vanessa first. May your marriage always be built on truth, and may betrayal never find a seat at your table. A few people actually gasped. Vanessa's mother covered her mouth. Daniel's shoulders shook as he lowered his head, and for the first time that night, I saw it clearly. My son hadn't known. Whatever this spectacle was, Thomas had blindsided him too. Then I turned slightly, just enough to glance at the woman on my husband's arm. And to unexpected guests, I added with a polite smile, Thank you for revealing what years of loyalty sometimes fail to uncover. The room went so quiet I could hear the soft hum of the air conditioning. The blonde smile faltered. Thomas's jaw tightened. I took a delicate sip of champagne, set the glass down, and picked up my evening purse. Daniel, I said gently, your mother loves you more than this moment can ruin. Tonight is still about you. His eyes filled instantly. I leaned forward, kissed his cheek, then did the same for Vanessa, whose mascara was already beginning to blur from overwhelmed tears. And then, I walked away. Not rushed, not broken. I walked across that polished ballroom floor with my back straight and my dignity intact, while whispers followed me like falling rain. Behind me, I heard Thomas call my name once. I didn't turn around, because for weeks, maybe months, small things had been whispering their own warnings. Late business trips, hidden phone calls, the sudden obsession with new cologne, the way he'd guarded his phone like state secrets. And one memory surfaced sharper than all the others. 3 weeks earlier, when I found a hotel receipt in his blazer pocket for a suite less than 10 miles from our own home. That was the first moment I realized my marriage might already be over. I had simply been the last to be informed. 3 weeks before my son's wedding, I stood alone in our laundry room holding a navy blazer I had ironed for Thomas more times than I could count. It was an ordinary Tuesday. Rain tapped softly against the kitchen windows. I remember because I'd been planning seating charts with Vanessa that afternoon, carefully arranging family members so no old grudges would ruin. Daniel's big day. I reached into Thomas's pocket looking for a dry cleaning ticket. Instead, I found a hotel receipt. The Grand Mercer Hotel. 1 king suite. Champagne service. 2 guests. My hands went still. At first, I told myself there had to be an explanation. A business meeting. A client arrangement. Some harmless misunderstanding. After nearly 38 years of marriage, your mind learns to protect itself before your heart can catch up. But then I saw the date. Our anniversary weekend. The same weekend Thomas told me he had to fly to Chicago for an investment conference. I remember sitting down on the edge of the washing machine because my legs no longer trusted me. That Sunday, I had eaten dinner alone. I had even saved him a slice of his favorite coconut cake. While he was 10 miles away, in a suite, with someone else. I should have confronted him then. I didn't. Not because I was weak. Because women my age learn something powerful after surviving childbirth, layoffs, grief, mortgages, and betrayal. You do not confront a man until you understand the full shape of his deception. So I said nothing. I washed the blazer, folded it neatly, served dinner that night as though my world had not shifted beneath me. And then I started paying attention. The password changed on his phone. His sudden gym membership. Credit card charges for restaurants he claimed never to visit. A jeweler's box hidden deep in his golf bag, containing a bracelet that was absolutely not for me. Each discovery felt less like heartbreak and more like evidence. By the week of the wedding, I no longer wondered if Thomas was unfaithful. I knew. What I didn't know was how cruel he intended to be. Because betrayal in private is devastating. But betrayal under crystal chandeliers, in front of your child, your family, and everyone you've ever loved, that required a different kind of woman to survive. Good thing. I was already becoming her. By the Thursday before the wedding, I had become a woman who noticed everything. Not loudly, not desperately, quietly. Thomas mistook my silence for ignorance. That was his first real mistake. The second came when he forgot that women who spend decades holding families together know how to recognize patterns. We notice when cologne changes, when lies become polished, when guilt starts dressing itself like confidence. That afternoon, I was at the country club ballroom for final wedding preparations. Vanessa had asked me to help review floral arrangements, and despite the storm quietly building inside my own marriage, I showed up. Because Daniel deserved at least one parent who understood commitment. I was checking place cards when someone touched my elbow. Evelyn, a soft voice said. I turned to find Mary Ann, my husband's former executive assistant. She had retired 2 years earlier and always struck me as the kind of woman who noticed more than she said. Her expression wasn't casual. May I speak with you privately? There are moments in life when your body understands the truth before your mind allows it. I followed her into an empty hallway near the catering kitchen. Marian looked pale. I debated whether to tell you this, she said carefully. But after what I saw last month, I couldn't stay quiet. Every sound around me seemed to fade. She reached into her handbag and handed me a folded invoice. A private jewelry purchase. Diamond bracelet. Matching earrings. Purchased by Thomas Reed. Delivery note. For Claire. Can't wait until Daniel's wedding weekend. Claire. Not client. Not conference. Claire. My fingers tightened around that paper, but my voice stayed level. Who is Claire? Marian hesitated, and somehow that pause hurt more than the answer. She's Vanessa's older sister. For one suspended second, the hallway floor may as well have disappeared beneath me. Not a stranger. Not some distant affair. My husband had been involved with the sister of our future daughter-in-law. A woman who had attended family dinners, bridal showers, Sunday lunches in my home. A woman I had hugged. I could have screamed. Instead, I folded the invoice once. Then twice. Does Daniel know? Marianne's eyes filled with pity. I don't believe so. I nodded slowly. Because in that moment, my humiliation became something else entirely. Not just heartbreak. A battlefield. And for the first time since finding that hotel receipt, I stopped asking myself how badly this would destroy me, and started asking how many lies were about to destroy them. I returned to the ballroom carrying that folded invoice inside my evening purse like it weighed nothing. But it did. It weighed 38 years. It weighed every Christmas morning, every packed school lunch, every mortgage payment, every time I stood beside Thomas believing loyalty was something sacred. And now, apparently, it weighed exactly one diamond bracelet for Claire. Inside the reception hall, the florist was adjusting white roses beneath golden candlelight. Staff hurried between tables. Vanessa was laughing near the dance floor with her bridesmaids, blissfully unaware that betrayal had already taken a seat at her wedding. And Claire stood near the bar in a champagne-colored silk dress, smiling like she belonged in every room she entered. She saw me and waved. Waved. I smiled back. That was the moment I realized something important. Women like Claire often mistake composure for weakness. They think if you don't make a scene, you don't see the fire. They're usually wrong. Mrs. Reed, she said brightly as I approached. Vanessa told me how much you've done for this wedding. We're all so grateful. Her perfume was soft, expensive, familiar. The same scent I had noticed on Thomas's collar 2 weeks earlier. I looked directly at her, not cruelly, just clearly. Family should always be worth the effort, I said. For one brief second, something flickered in her expression. Not guilt, recognition. She knew that I knew. But she also believed I would protect appearances. Preserve Daniel's wedding. Stay quiet for the sake of dignity. And she was right. For now. Because public chaos would only wound my son more deeply. So I did what women like me have done for generations when the world expects us to collapse. I adapted. I spent the rest of that evening finalizing centerpieces, confirming rehearsal dinner menus, and smiling for family photos while quietly collecting details. Who Claire texted. Where Thomas disappeared. Which credit card he used for last-minute vendor expenses. By rehearsal night, I had copies. Dates. Reservations. Receipts. I didn't need assumptions anymore. I had proof. And as I stood in the hotel's suite bathroom later that night, removing my pearl earrings in silence, I stared at my reflection and barely recognized the woman looking back. Not because she was broken, because she was done being underestimated. Thomas thought Daniel's wedding weekend would mark the beginning of his new life. He had no idea. It was also the weekend I began preparing the end of his old one. The morning of the wedding arrived bright and cruelly beautiful. Sunlight poured through the floor-to-ceiling windows of my hotel suite, casting soft gold across the ivory blouse I had laid out for hair and makeup. Outside, the vineyard glistened. Rows of white chairs stood perfectly aligned beneath rose arches. Staff moved like clockwork across the estate grounds. It looked like the beginning of a fairy tale. I had never felt further from one. Vanessa had asked me to join the bridal party early for breakfast, saying she wanted me there, like a second mother. The words should have warmed me. Instead, they felt heavy. Because sitting just a few feet from her would be Claire, the sister she trusted, the woman helping destroy my marriage while smiling through champagne brunches and wedding photos. Still, I went. Because truth, I was learning, reveals itself best when you stop interrupting it. The bridal suite smelled of hairspray, coffee, and fresh peonies. Bridesmaids laughed in silk robes embroidered with gold initials. Vanessa looked radiant, glowing with the fragile hope only brides possess before life teaches them how complicated vows can become. And Claire? Claire was pinning a diamond bracelet around her wrist. The bracelet. Thomas's bracelet. I recognized it instantly from the invoice Marianne had handed me. Isn't it gorgeous? Claire said, lifting her wrist toward the light. A very special gift. I met her eyes in the vanity mirror. It certainly is, I replied. Vanessa smiled, oblivious. Claire always lands on her feet. If only she knew. I watched Thomas arrive an hour later in his tailored tuxedo, moving through the venue with practiced confidence. He kissed my cheek for appearances, called me beautiful, like we were still the couple everyone envied. And then, as he turned away, his hand brushed subtly against Claire's lower back. Small, quick, invisible to most, but not to a woman who had spent 38 years studying him. That single touch said more than any confession. By noon, I stopped hoping this disaster might somehow spare Daniel. It wouldn't. The only question left was when the explosion would come. And deep down, I think part of me already knew. Thomas wasn't planning to wait until after the wedding. He hadn't spent months building a fantasy just to hide in its shadows. No, my husband wanted an audience. And as I stood there fastening the pearls my mother left me, I made a silent promise to myself. If Thomas intended to shatter my life in public, then I would survive it in public too. The ceremony itself was flawless. That was the cruelest part. A string quartet played beneath drifting white roses. Daniel stood at the altar in a black tuxedo, his hands trembling just enough to remind me he was still my little boy beneath all that polished adulthood. Vanessa floated down the aisle on her father's arm, glowing beneath cathedral-length lace and sunlight. And I cried. Not because of Thomas, not because of Claire, but because despite everything unraveling beneath the surface, my son was still standing there believing in love. I wondered if that innocence would survive the night. During the vows, Thomas played his role perfectly. Proud father, devoted husband. He held my hand when guests looked our way, smiled for photographers, even brushed away one of my tears as though we were still the golden couple people admired. If deception were an Olympic sport, my husband would have taken gold. But I noticed Claire too, always positioned where Thomas could see her, always watching. At the reception, the estate ballroom transformed into candlelight and crystal. A 5-tier cake shimmered beneath chandeliers. Silver trays carried filet mignon and champagne. The band played Sinatra. Guests toasted Daniel and Vanessa with laughter warm enough to almost make me forget the storm gathering behind my ribs. Almost. Then came the father of the groom's speech. Thomas stood, smoothing his tuxedo jacket as he took the microphone. He smiled at Daniel first. Son, today marks the beginning of a brave new chapter. His voice was smooth, familiar, dangerous. He spoke about marriage, growth, honesty. Honesty. I nearly laughed. Then he turned toward me. For one suspended second, his expression changed. Not guilt, not fear, relief, as if he had been waiting all day to set something down. Before this beautiful evening goes any further, he said, tapping his champagne glass lightly, there's something I need to say. Evelyn, you've been a wonderful partner for many years. The room softened. People smiled. They thought this was gratitude. I knew better. But life changes, he continued. And sometimes, we owe it to ourselves to stop pretending. Every muscle in my body went still. Across the room, Claire slowly rose from her chair. No confusion. No shock. She already knew. And in that moment, surrounded by candlelight, wedding music, and the sound of my son's happiness about to be shattered, I realized this was never going to be a private betrayal. Thomas had planned this, not just to leave me, but to humiliate me where the damage would echo loudest, at our son's wedding. So I set down my fork, straightened my spine, and prepared myself to meet the worst moment of my life. With witnesses. Evelyn, Thomas said into the microphone, his voice polished and steady. You've stood by me for many years. You gave me a family, a home, and more memories than I can count. For one fragile second, the room relaxed. I could feel it. Guests smiled. A few women dabbed at their eyes. Daniel even looked relieved, as though perhaps his father was about to deliver some overdue public gratitude. Then Thomas exhaled. But this is the end for us, he said. I've found someone new. The silence that followed did not feel real. It felt surgical, precise, sharp, fatal. Across the ballroom, every fork stopped. Every whisper died. Even the band seemed to freeze in place. Daniel's face lost all color. Vanessa's bouquet slipped from her fingers and hit the floor with a soft, devastating thud. And Claire stepped forward. Not hesitantly, not ashamed, like this had always been her cue. She moved toward my husband in that champagne-colored gown, her diamond bracelet flashing beneath the chandeliers I had helped choose. Then Thomas reached for her hand. Publicly, deliberately. I heard someone near the back actually gasp. Oh my God, my chest tightened, but not from heartbreak. Heartbreak had happened weeks ago in a laundry room with a hotel receipt. No, this was something colder. This was humiliation sharpened into spectacle. Daniel pushed back his chair so hard it nearly toppled. Dad, what are you doing? He asked, his voice cracking so deeply that every mother in that room probably felt it. Thomas didn't even look ashamed. I'm done living dishonestly, he said. Dishonestly. The word nearly burned through me. Because dishonesty would have been an affair. This was cruelty with a guest list. Vanessa looked between her sister and my husband as realization spread across her face in slow, unbearable horror. But Claire said nothing. She didn't need to. Some betrayals are loudest when spoken without words. And there I sat, 67 years old, sapphire gown, pearls at my throat, surrounded by 200 witnesses to the demolition of a life I had spent nearly 4 decades building. Thomas expected me to break, to scream, to beg. Instead, I stood, slowly, gracefully. I lifted my champagne glass with a hand so steady it surprised even me. Because if my husband intended for this night to become the story of how he destroyed me, then I would make sure it became the story of how badly he miscalculated. I let the silence stretch. Not because I didn't know what to say, because silence, when wielded properly, can humiliate louder than rage ever could. My heels clicked softly against the ballroom floor as I rose from my chair, champagne glass in hand, shoulders back, pearls steady against my throat. 200 faces turned toward me, waiting for collapse, for tears, for the wounded wife to become entertainment. I would not give them that. I looked first at my son. Poor Daniel. His wedding day had become collateral damage in his father's performance, and the anguish in his eyes nearly broke the part of me that was still only a mother. But I held steady. Then I smiled. To my husband, I said, my voice calm enough to cut glass, thank you. The confusion was immediate. Thomas blinked. Claire's confident posture shifted. A nervous murmur swept through the room. Thank you, I repeated, lifting my glass slightly higher. For finally doing in public what you've clearly been doing in private for quite some time. A ripple moved across the guests, small, sharp, electric. I saw Vanessa's father straighten in his seat. I saw Claire's mother go pale. And for the first time all evening, Thomas looked uncertain. After all, I continued, my tone almost conversational. It takes a very special man to carry on with his daughter-in-law's sister, while his wife is choosing floral arrangements for their son's wedding. The gasp that followed was not polite. It was explosive. Vanessa staggered backward like the air had been ripped from her lungs. Claire, she whispered, her voice shattered. Daniel turned toward his aunt marriage-to-be, then to his father, horror dawning in waves so visible it seemed to physically alter him. Thomas stepped forward. Evelyn, this is not the time. Oh, I believe you chose the time, I said, finally letting steel enter my voice. Then, from my evening purse, I withdrew the folded invoice. Diamond bracelet. Matching earrings. Grand Mercer Hotel. Champagne service. I didn't wave it dramatically. I simply handed it to Vanessa. Because truth doesn't need theatrics when documentation exists. Her trembling hands opened the paper. Claire stopped breathing. And suddenly, my husband's grand announcement no longer looked like liberation. It looked like exposure. The chandeliers still sparkled. The band still stood frozen. But now the entire ballroom had shifted. This was no longer the story of a man boldly choosing new love. This was the story of 2 selfish people being seen clearly, all at once. And as Thomas's carefully constructed fantasy began collapsing beneath crystal light and public disgust, I took my first full breath of the evening. Because at last, the humiliation no longer belonged to me. Vanessa read the invoice once. Then again, I watched her wedding day joy drain away in real time, like someone pulling sunlight from stained glass. Her bouquet was already on the floor. Now her hands began to shake so badly the paper rattled between her fingers. Claire, she said, but this time it wasn't confusion. It was devastation. Her sister's mouth opened, then closed. For once, the polished smile, the practiced elegance, the carefully curated charm, gone. Daniel snatched the invoice next. I had raised my son to be thoughtful, measured, kind. I had never seen rage enter him so quietly. His eyes scanned the hotel dates, the jewelry receipt, the anniversary weekend. His jaw tightened with every line until he no longer looked like a groom. He looked like a son realizing his father had detonated two families at once. You used our wedding? He asked Thomas, his voice low and dangerous in a way I had never heard before. Thomas straightened, still foolish enough to believe confidence could outrun consequences. Daniel, this is complicated. No, Daniel said. That single word cracked louder than the champagne glasses. It's disgusting. A stunned murmur tore through the ballroom. Claire reached for Vanessa's arm. Please, let me explain. Vanessa stepped back as if her sister's touch physically burned. Explain what? She cried, mascara finally falling. That you slept with her husband? During my engagement? While helping me choose centerpieces? The cruelty of it landed all at once. Not just betrayal. Infiltration. Every bridal fitting. Every family brunch. Every smiling photo. Poison hidden in celebration. Claire began to cry, but by then, tears looked less like remorse and more like inconvenience. Thomas reached toward me then, as though, somehow, I might help stabilize the disaster he created. Evelyn, I took one small step back. Not dramatic. Definitive. No, I said quietly. You do not get to use my grace to soften your disgrace. I have lived many years, and I've learned this. The final power a woman has in betrayal is refusing to protect the people who shattered her. Around us, guests were no longer whispering. They were leaving, some out of discomfort, others out of disgust. Vanessa's father removed his tuxedo jacket and placed it around his daughter's shoulders. Her mother guided her away from Claire without a word. And my son, my beautiful boy, standing in the wreckage of what should have been the happiest night of his life, looked directly at his father and said, "Don't contact me." Thomas went pale. Not when exposed, not when judged, but when he finally understood the true cost. He hadn't just lost a wife. He had lost his son. And as the ballroom emptied beneath glittering chandeliers and dying candlelight, I realized something extraordinary. Thomas had tried to publicly end me, but instead, he had publicly ended himself. 6 months later, I stood on the back porch of the lake house my mother left me, barefoot, coffee warm in my hands, watching the Tennessee sunrise spill gold across still water. The silence there felt nothing like the silence of that ballroom. This silence healed. The divorce had been finalized 3 months earlier. Thomas fought, of course, not for me, for assets, reputation, appearances. But men like Thomas often forget something dangerous about women who spent decades managing households, balancing books, signing tax forms, and quietly paying attention. We know exactly where everything is buried. My attorney wasn't surprised the day we reviewed the trust documents. My name was on more than Thomas ever realized. Investments, property protections, business clauses his arrogance overlooked. In the end, Claire didn't stay. Women who help destroy foundations are rarely prepared to live inside the rubble. His business suffered. Friends disappeared. Country club invitations dried up. And Daniel, my son, came to see me every Sunday. The first time he arrived alone, he stood in my doorway like the little boy who used to come home after losing baseball games. "I'm sorry, Mom," he said. Not because it was his fault, but because pain makes good sons grieve what they failed to see. I held his face in my hands, smiled, and told him the truth. You are not responsible for your father's character. Vanessa left too, quietly, with dignity. She and I still speak sometimes, not as mother-in-law and daughter-in-law, but as two women who survived the same storm from different sides. People still ask if Thomas ruining our son's wedding was the worst day of my life. No, it was one of the most important. Because that was the night illusion died. The night I stopped confusing endurance with love. The night I learned that being discarded by someone dishonest is not destruction. It is release. At 67, I did not lose everything beneath those chandeliers. I lost a man who mistook loyalty for weakness. And in doing so, I found myself. So if you're listening today from your own quiet heartbreak, let me tell you what I now know for certain. Some endings do not break you. Some endings finally introduce you to your strength.